Hello, this is the Liverpool Black Men's Group podcast. My name's Laurence Westgaph, and today's topic is going to be on the subject of identity. Liverpool is a very unique place, certainly in how we view ourselves as black people. So I thought today we'd have a really interesting discussion with a number of members of the group who have a lot of varied opinions on identity and its importance to how we see ourselves and our place in the world in the 21st century. Guys, if you'd like to introduce yourselves, that would be really useful.
Okay. Start with that.
Okay, I'm Alan, member of the Black Men's Group, and I work as a counsellor here in LA, part of the Liverpool Black Men's Group, involved with the Caribbean Centre too.
And my name's Patrick Graham. You may know from other podcasts my introductions get a little bit longer, but I'm a writer, a poet, actor, community activist, member of the Liverpool Men's Black Group, member of Liverpool Black History Research Group, and I'm also a reporter as well for a local newspaper, and I am here today to be part of this discussion.
Okay.
My name's Ray Quarless and I'm a community activist. I'm also involved in a company called Heritage Development Company Liverpool, which identifies community assets of Liverpool's black community and showcases them through the medium of exhibition.
And as I said, my name's Laurence Westgaph. I'm also a member of the Liverpool Black Men's Group. I work as a historian in residence for NML, and I'm a community activist involved in a number of different initiatives over the years. So guys, I'd like to just start off by asking you, how do you feel your identity has shaped who you are as an individual? And again, many of us in Liverpool, because of this history of a long history of black settlements, when we go to other places within the country, people might not see us as being black. I think that that's a really important aspect and something that we needs to be addressed in a way that is constructive, because these kinds of discussions can be a bit loose or destructive in many ways if not approached in the correct fashion. Can I find that at you?
Yeah, I think it's all to do with how you identify with yourself in terms of your upbringing, your background, your environment and family as well. So like, for example, you know, my dad is a Liverpool-born black man and my mother is a second-generation Irish woman. My grandparents are Bayesian and Liverpool-born black. My great-grandparents are Jamaican and white. So I'm sort of cultured in that respect. But I identify in the context of who I am and where I come from as being in the black mould because of how that's been structured. I grew up in Liverpool. I was born and brought up in Liverpool 1, which is in Kent Gardens, which is the microcosm of the Pitt Street area of 100, 150 years ago, Liverpool's black community, before it moved up to the Granby area. And my life's been shaped around that because of the numbers of nationalities I grew up with. Italian, Spanish, German, African, Caribbean, Indian, Chinese, and that is because of Liverpool's links, not directly with the Caribbean, but with the rest of the world. And that is what I think makes Liverpool so different and makes the blackness in Liverpool different, because it comes in a variety of different shades. And so I went to school at Windsor Street, black community, went to school at St James's, half and half, black community, Liverpool 1. And that has been sort of like my grounding in terms of how I was brought up, also directly relative to, you know, your uncles and your aunts, who are all mixed heritage and so on. And so that is sort of from where I come from in terms of my background in relation to the uniqueness of Liverpool.
Yeah, go on. I just add a little bit to what Ray said in relation to, you know, as you said, structure. Same thing, I'm just using a different terminology. Part of the social conditioning that people grow up with and developed, and part of Lawrence's opening where he said in certain cities they may look on someone who may have a white mother or white father to another black parent as being black, and a lot of that's to do with obviously the history and construct of Liverpool going back over the years, where it's been a seafaring port for many hundreds of years, and most, if not all of them seafarers were men. So it stands to reason that if men are coming over and they're going to meet a partner, a woman, they're going to be a white English woman, or or maybe Irish descent, as Ray's pointed out, in his family and so forth. So that would lead to a lot of people who have a black mother, white father, so to speak. But for me, when it comes to identity, especially in Liverpool, like growing up over the years, like someone who might have a white mother or father or so on, and when it comes to racial discrimination, I know we've stood side by side and we're being called exactly the same names, although other people in other cities might have a different view for some of them reasons, what I've just said. Nevertheless, that's part of that social construct and structure and social conditioning that's led to that. And for, again, that identity where some people will identify and say, well, I'm not black, I'm mixed race, or I'm this, I'm coloured, I'm brown, and all these different terminologies. That's, for me, I always look at that, well, that's simply because and only seems to take place when it becomes black and white, where people use that term mixed race, but they don't seem to use it if it was Chinese and white or and so on and so on. So for me, it's wrong, and it's always a visual thing, because visually, in my heritage, you look at me, but in my heritage, I've got great grandparents on both sides, mother and father, who are from India. Yeah, in Asia. So, because you can't see that visually in me, should I still be classed as mixed race? You know what I mean? So, it's all down to a visual thing, and I think that's wrong, because that's putting classification on people how they look, and it's up to people to identify themselves how they feel and how they want to. And a lot of that is shaped by themselves, but a lot of it is also shaped by society in some respects.
Mm-hmm. I think it's a really fascinating discussion, a really important discussion as well. It's one that's kind of quite personal for me as well. My background's very similar to Ray's. I have a black Liverpool-born father and a white mother, and grandparents from Barbados and from Ireland. And I was brought up outside of Liverpool in St Helens in a very white area. And I noticed the difference coming back to Liverpool East, where my family are from, and settling here. The kind of more inclusive kind of idea of blackness that exists here that compared to outside, because some people perceive my appearance, Patrick mentioned appearance, some people perceive my appearance as being ambiguous, or people have asked me different things: are you Greek, are you Persian? Not everyone can identify. I feel like I look like who I am, but some people don't see that in me. So when I came to Liverpool and wanted to get involved in the black community, I was wondering, would I be accepted? Would I be embraced? And actually, when Laurence invited me to join the group, I was a bit surprised, actually, because it was the Liverpool Black Men's Group. I was like, am I meant to be here? Am I allowed? And so it's an interesting discussion, and it's my own view, and it has evolved since I've been living here. But then you also see on Instagram and Facebook people who kind of want to fight back against that too. So you see people, there's in America there's this one drop rule, if you've got any black heritage, you're black. But then there's a bit of a pushback as well from some people who are saying, like, well, we're not the same as dark-skinned black people, and we do have different experiences, so are we okay to claim that? But there's a lot of people who want to gatekeep blackness, white and black. I've had black people and white people tell me what I am and what I'm not. And it's an important discussion.
Absolutely. I think it's really important to kind of arm yourself with the knowledge to kind of deal with that. First of all, it starts off by acknowledging that race is a spurious concept. Race does not exist. It is a social construct. Yeah. And because of that, it's constructed differently in different geographical locations. So, for example, in Jamaica, during the 18th century, blackness was graded down to a 16th degree. You had a black person who's the offspring of two Negroes. Then you had a Sambo, who was the offspring of a black person and a mulatto. Then you had the mulatto, who's the offspring of a black person and a white person. Then you had a quadroon, who was the offspring of a mulatto and a white person. An octoroon, right down to a hexdecaroon, otherwise known as a Mustafino. And only after you were a Mustafino, if a Mustafino and a white person, was their children considered to be white. And anybody of any of those categories had certain racial disadvantages based on that. But also within the social hierarchy, the lighter you were, the closer you felt, or the closer you was meant to be towards finally becoming white. And that was done specifically to create a buffer between the black presence and the white presence, because very few white women went to Jamaica. So most people thought the only way we're going to whiten this island is by having children with people over a number of generations who get progressively whiter. Yeah. So there was a benefit to that. But in that situation, that's very definite. And some people who are of Caribbean extraction bring that to Britain when they come here. So they see someone who's light-skinned and they think about their experiences back in Jamaica where that meant they did have a certain privilege. But I know growing up as a light-skinned person, and as Patrick's already pointed out, we've had to stand shoulder to shoulder with other people of a darker skin colour, because our experience here in a society where race has not been codified has been similar, if not the same. You mentioned the one drop rule. Now again, in the States, although you might have got more praise because you were lighter, there was no legal benefit to being lighter. So that one drop rule was there to disenfranchise you. So you could be white passing, but you were still a slave. Do you know what I mean? So race has been shaped differently in these different locations, and Liverpool is just one other example of where race has been shaped differently, especially in light of this old black community that we've already discussed. When people come here from other nations and they see us, they just think, well, you're mixed, or you're this, or you're that. When our ideas of race has been shaped within the crucible of Britain throughout this long history, you know, and that's something that a lot of people don't grasp. It's their ignorance. Yeah, do you know what I mean? And
I was 15, right, and I left school, and I was taken by the careers office in Sir Thomas Street, and he told me to go for a job as the second man on a wagon. And all that was for the Loon Laundry, right? So I go to Bootle, and I knew Bootle on the basis of when we were kids, we used to jump on the back of lorries up the Dock Road to Bootle and back down again. I knew Bootle from that respect. And I went for that. I went for the job, didn't get the job, and I came out and I was a bit disorientated, because this is what makes Liverpool so unique. I was disorientated about the geography to get back to the Dock Road. Sees a lad, blonde hair, about 17, and I say to him, "Excuse me, mate, can you tell me the way to the Dock Road?" And he turns around to me and he said to me, "Fuck off, you nigger." Right, so I'm thinking, I'm 15, I'm thinking, yeah, but there's my dad, but this is me. Why is he calling me dad? Because I'm not. But I am. Because he's just called me. Why is he calling me? And that's the uniqueness of Liverpool. Bernie Wenton once said, if you're not black in Liverpool, you're considered to be. Right? And that's that. And that put it all into context for me when that fella called me that, and then I referred back to what Bernie Wenton said. And I was thinking, wow, this is why Liverpool stands alone, man. Because if I was elsewhere and I'd asked somebody else, a racist, he probably wouldn't have called me that. But Liverpool does. And that's how unique Liverpool was. And that was back then. That was in the late 60s, man. You know what I mean? So that's for me, that's what makes Liverpool unique in its approach to the issues of race on the one hand, and also how people identify with race themselves. And that for me was just like, boom, that's who I am.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really important that you point that out, because again, you really see it when either people who aren't from the city come here and their observations. So J.B. Priestley, for example, back in the 30s, when he talks about going around the Pitt Street area and seeing these people of all different colours and half-breeds, etc., blah, blah, blah. And then responses academically, like the Muriel Fletcher report, which is kind of saying that half-castes, as they were referred to then, are a blight on society. Do you know what I mean? They come here for a reason, don't they? Because there's people here who they can survey, you know, who they can talk about in these types of terminologies. And I think that has very much shaped the experience of black people people in this city. When Gifford writes in the 80s about how the experience of black people in Liverpool has been uniquely horrific. Now, he's not talking about black people who have a dark skin colour. He's talking about black people across the board. Do you know what I'm saying? And that's something that I think is really important to kind of highlight. And then that's really clear in our activism, because our activism, you know, and I always refer to a discussion I had with Paul Gilroy when he said to me, we look to the black community of Liverpool as the most oh God, you have to cut that. We look to Liverpool as the most progressive, most radical, most uncompromisingly militant black community in the country. And this is a community that a lot of people will come here and say, you're not black. Do you know what I mean? We were in the vanguard during that period of the struggles against the Thatcher government, against the racism, that visceral racism that black people suffered during that period. And yet many people who would come here and stand on the shoulders and take advantage of the opportunities that were created by the sacrifice of these so-called mixed race people, or these light-skinned people, and won't be able to acknowledge the important role that they'd played in the development of the black community. And it goes across the board. When people will say that to me, and say, okay, so Malcolm X wasn't black. He had a white granddad. W.E.B. Du Bois wasn't black. You know, these figures, Frederick Douglass, who had a white father, slave owner, Bob Marley. Well, see, I'd stay away from Bob because it's the music thing. Do you know what I mean? But, you know, these figures who, you know, we hold up as these bastions of blackness. And yet, when you go and look that little bit deeper, the history is not as clear-cut as, you know, I'm straight from Africa and, you know, first generation.
It all boils down to, like, there is a lot of, you know, I said these social constructs of colour in order to put people in the place, for want of a better phrase, so that you can get a greater advantage over them. That's what it's all created, because, you know, scientifically it's a nonsense when it comes down to who's inferior, who's superior. There's no such thing. It's down to your societal and educational environment, which decides what knowledge base you have or don't have. And when you're disenfranchised simply because of how you look, then it's quite easy. You know, the easiest example I say to people to shut down silly arguments about, well, Africa hasn't really done this or that, I say, well, okay, if you have a child and you keep that child at home and don't school them in any knowledge, and then they have a child, I said, in one generation, that family's just been dumbed down straight away. So imagine when that's been going on for 100 years, 200 years, 300 years, you just totally wiped out our knowledge base. But you can wipe it out in one generation. So in like 20, 30 years, it's gone. You know, by stopping that child from progressing in any way and learning anything. That's what's happened to the black community, and you know, all the examples that we've heard so far in Jamaica with all these different terminologies for someone who's got a white father, white mother, and then the offspring of that who might have then go with another black person or another white person, all these different terminology, octoroon and hectoroon and all so on and so on. These are all the mechanisms that were put in place to confuse all the oppressed peoples. So they're fighting against themselves, while the elite, who are the ones who implement all these things, can get away with continuing to oppress and exploit, and so on and so on. You know, you've got... In fact, I've lost the point. I'll come back to it that I was going to make just to finish off that bit, but I'll hand over to Alan. It'll come back to me in a minute.
It's interesting because, like, I was just thinking about Meghan Markle, for example. She's somebody that in America is called a black woman, an African American woman. Yet in here, if you notice in the press, she's described as, in the British press, as a mixed race woman. Yeah, in Liverpool, she'd probably be seen as a black woman, as part of the black community. So it's as a kind of mixed person, kind of as part of the black community, it's just confusing, you know. Like I don't mind saying I've been to see a therapist. I chose a black therapist, like a African-centered therapist, to talk through some of these issues, because it's wrecked my head a bit, you know, trying to figure out who I am and where I sit in all of this.
Yeah, well, sorry, the point I was going to make is these social constructs are made, as I said, with that control in mind. Because if you had, let's just say, for example, a white Russian who married a white Russian man who married a white Irish woman, then standing alone they would say, oh, she's from the Russian race, standing alone they're from the Irish race. But once they marry and produce a child, that child's not going to be called mixed race, so there's nothing visually to distinguish that in any way. But as soon as I said, black comes into it, then that comparison's made, simply because this all stems from that not from the creation of the slave trade, but to the reasons for the continued justification of the slave trade, and then for the reasons that we used to then go to colonise Africa. You had to create these different constructs of how people look into where they would stand or be allowed to stand within society, and that still goes on to this day.
See, I think that's really important to kind of realise just how the slave trade has shaped the experience of black people within the diaspora. The slave trade creates the black diaspora in terms of the vast numbers of black people that you find outside the continent of Africa, and because that is such a pernicious and terrible history, people don't understand the way it permeates most of our, almost all of our psyche, if not all. For Africans, it's just an event in the history of the continent. For black people in the diaspora, it's the thing that makes us black. It's the thing that makes us not Africans, not Yoruba, not Fulbe, not Fulani. It makes us black, homogenized as black, and then the Europeans, in order to control and keep power, tried to divide and conquer, just the way they divide and conquer on the continents of Africa and elsewhere where they've colonised. They've done that by looking at phenotype. I think it's really important. When I talk to young people about it, people who, not young as in of an age 18, I talk about the difference between being phenotypically black and being politically black. Anybody, no matter what your phenotype is, can subscribe to a political consciousness of blackness. Do you know what I mean? Being consciously black and understanding that means that people of all shades, if they identify as black and feel the discrimination of black people within the context of British society or the diaspora more broadly, they can all subscribe to that. And the history is already in place because, as I've just pointed out, a number of the most notable figures in the black struggle were people who would be considered to be mixed race in certain circles. You're not telling me Malcolm X was not 100% black. In his outlook, it's undoubted. Do you know what I mean? The same with Frederick Douglass, the same with Du Bois, and these aren't people who use their so-called... Also, we've got to have this idea of light-skin privilege. Again, growing up in Liverpool, I've never seen that.
No.
You might see light-skin privilege in Jamaica, but growing up in Liverpool, in the visceral racism that black people in Liverpool have faced over the long durée, going right back into the 19th century, I can show you articles where people have been called yellow faggots and all this racist term because of their light-skinness. This was not something that was of any privilege to us here. We are politically black in every sense because we acknowledge and we adhere to a politically black philosophy in terms of our philosophical outlook. And that's what I think is really important to kind of equip yourself with, no matter what the tone of your skin is. And it's something that you take with you outside the city, even when you're dealing with people who might not be as aware of that. It's undoubtedly the case. But again, within our framework, within the framework of blackness in this country, it's not something that's really been pushed outside of the boundaries of these very active communities like ours.
No. There's people who will testify during the 81 uprisings, and they were arrested and being physically assaulted in certain cases by the police. And one guy who was my complexion was getting beat on, and another officer stepped in and said no, beat on him, and pointed on someone who would be classed as mixed race, and he got absolutely waylaid. So it was almost he was getting punished for basically having the white
because they're probably
and
thinking and he's a scouser.
So there was no
he's darker than him.
Yeah, there was no privilege acquired in that. The actual darker guy on a rare occasion, which would have been different from the experiences in Jamaica and parts of America. He was beaten on more so, and the other guy, was left. Just on a different track, though. So it's a strange scenario.
I mean, when you go back to Africa and you go back to the continent of Africa, and you see it as the biggest continent on the planet, and then you see what happened to the enslavement of Africans, and then we come back and the First World War takes place, and it's taking place on the back of the Ottoman Empire, right? And the Ottoman Empire has got, obviously, territories in Africa. It's in Africa. That's it. After the war, what happens is Africa gets partitioned off. And who's doing the partitioning? The Europeans. And they partitioned off the lands that we know: Algeria, Malawi, South Africa, Botswana, Tanzania, Chad, Congo, Sudan. They're all countries that have been bordered by the European, not by the African, but by the European to suit their agenda. Again, which comes on the back of the whole issue of colonialism. And that extends itself to the First World War and post-First World War in terms of keeping everything settled. Okay, you know, Algeria is being sorted, Morocco and Algeria is getting sorted by the French, Namibia and Angola is getting sorted by the Portuguese and the Germans, and the Brits have got whatever they want, and the French have got whatever they want, and the Spanish have got whatever they want, and we'll give Ethiopia to the Italians. I mean, I can go on.
Yeah.
I can go on.
So when you take that's the
repartitioning of Africa, which is also part of the whole issue of what we're discussing now about identity, because that is an identity of the continent, African continent, and it lost its identity when the European came back after slavery.
Fighting over.
It finished with slavery, but no, let's come back now and colonise it, right? And let's rape it of its precious minerals, of its precious cultures, of its precious religions, of its precious everything. And that's why we see Africa in the state it's in. It's being raped. It's being raped, man. And that's something that we don't talk about. That's something that we don't discuss in relation to the issues of identity when we take it on board that Africa is the way it is now because of what happened through the partitioning. And that's when I always bring it back to colonialism again. I bring most things back to colonialism because that's the way I see it. I don't think it's just the present day situation which has occurred. Nah, this is part of the whole culture of colonialism, and that was as well. And that's why we don't hear anything about that partitioning during that period in Africa during that time.
I think there's some really important other aspects of identity to kind of talk about, and these would be around cultural authenticity. Now, what do I mean by that? So the idea that there's, you know, being black is a thing and acting black is also a thing. So by acting black, you do certain things and don't do other things. You know, for example, you know, black people listen to rap music, they don't listen to rock music, or black people listen to soul music, they don't listen to classical music, or black people eat these types of foods but don't eat those types of foods. These things can be very limiting, but a lot of people subscribe to it because they think that that means that they're doing what is expected of them when they're black. Now, this is something which is really quite unique to black people in the diaspora as opposed to black people in Africa. So you'll find black people in Africa have no problem with, you know, learning how to play the cello, for example, or learning, you know, or subscribing to listening to particular types of music that might not be what we would listen to in the diaspora. But it goes further than just little cultural things like that. It also can go down to how they act or what we consider to be valuable as individuals. So, you know, a lot of people, I remember getting told that I acted white because I used to study in school. You know what I mean? And like that was like the white thing to do. It wasn't, you know, if you want to do well in school. Do you know what I mean? You're not acting like the Joker. Do you know what I mean? Those types of things were seen to be lacked value, and failing was actually, you know, a positive. You know, it gave you some kudos. You know, and I think that
sign on together.
Well, there you go. Do you know what I mean? Or, you know, playing sports is black. You know, but as I say, singing in the choir might not be black. Do you know what I mean? And that it's that type of thing, and I think that that's really limiting for our young people. You know, this idea now that, you know, my son's really into gangster rap right now. Do you know what I mean? And I'm just like this to him, well, you know, like enjoy the music, but don't think that that means that you're acting in a way that you're supposed to act because, you know, you're black, because that's not. Do you know what I mean? And it's about having multiple narratives around our culture, because, you know, we've succeeded in so many different areas. You know, people will tell you Samuel Taylor Coleridge. You know, he was playing classical music, the song of Hiawatha. He's a black man. You know, does that mean he was acting white? You know what I mean? Of course not.
Or just performing.
Yeah, there you go. Of course not. And this is you know, I think that that's very limiting for a lot of young black people. You know, who think that, nah, man, I'm not going to do that because my mates will think I'm acting like a white person. You know, and we're the only people who do it. Asians don't do it. No one would say to an Asian, you're not acting Indian because you play the cello. Do you know what I mean? Or, you know, a Chinese person, you know, that's not what Chinese people do. That's the kind of thing that, you know, we really have to address. We have to show multiple role models, or, you know, models, paradigms of what it means to be a black person that aren't all nihilistic or negative. Do you know what I'm saying? And that for me is like, you know, there's some real nihilistic parts of our culture, or the dominant discourse, or the popular culture that really need to be challenged. You know,
part of the miseducation, isn't it?
It's part of, but now it's become self-fulfilling.
That's it.
Do you know what I mean? And now we propagate it. Do you know what I mean? Like what always shocked me, right? Some of you, if you're into rap music, you might have heard this. Rick Ross, he did a song about date rape, and it got banned. But if you rap about killing niggas and shooting 10 niggas and blowing his head off, that's a platinum seller.
Number one,
do you know what I mean? Like the horror, you know, at him writing a song about date rape. But you can write as many songs as you like about killing, you know, with the black people, and that's fine. That's a multi-million. Yeah, that'll sell. Do you know what I mean?
Both should be banned.
Do you know what I'm saying? Exactly. Do you know what I mean? That's what I'm saying. Like, that's okay. You know, and that for me kind of says it all and sums it up. Like, it's up to us. I don't think it can be done from the outside. What we can do is we can challenge people who propagate those types of ideas of what it means to be black, particularly black men. Do you know what I mean? What the black male culture is, you know, is supposed to embody. But it also has to come from us.
Exactly. You know what I mean? It's a case of you've got to get your own house in order, so you can advise someone else to sort their own house out, and that's one of them issues stemming from that miseducation and the divide and rule, divide and conquer, to when you then do it to yourself, and then it almost excuses the people responsible of any responsibility, because they can say, well, you're doing this, you're doing that, or they will use the press to name things as black on black crime. But if a white guy stabs another white guy, there's no white on white crime, it's just a crime, you know. So they will use them type of terminologies, and we'll even buy into that and say it ourselves, and say, yeah, you know, it is clearly an issue on all different levels. It's a social issue, but things are just used again as part of that structural separation, for people to gain power, for people to take power, and for people to hide on that responsibility. Like Ray said before about bringing things back to colonialism, like we'll mention things like that and someone will accuse us of bashing British history, when, as I mentioned, I've mentioned in earlier podcasts we've done, history is historical information, factual information of the past. You know, that's just a brief description of what history means. So to tell that this happened in history, it's not bashing. If that happened and it's the truth, why should you feel say someone's trying to make you feel guilty? How? You wasn't around 150 years ago if that took place. But if you admire that history and revere that history, then yeah, you are culpable in that respect, because you would like it to revert back to them ways. So there's them type of nuances that come into that debate. But if it's nothing to do with you because you weren't alive in that time, then nobody's blaming you. You're just simply saying what happened at that period of time, and people are entitled to know about it, because the history of anything shapes the future. You know what I mean? The undercoat of paint shapes how the final coat is going to look. You do a bad undercoat, you're going to get a bad paint job. So if you don't know your history, you're going to get a bad present and a bad future. And it's that type of analogy that translates into real life. So, you know, that's putting it simple for those who may fail to understand, refuse to understand, or can't understand.
Like you said in one of the other podcasts, you know, people get defensive just as soon as things like this get talked about and get discussed. You know, just a group like this meeting would get some people's backs up, wouldn't it? You know, I saw on Facebook the other day there was a black business seminar being advertised, and the amount of hatred and comments underneath it, people absolutely outraged just the fact of a group of black men were getting together to do something positive, something that maybe doesn't fit that kind of stereotype that you're talking about, and the outrage was just, you know.
See, what people
That's what I'm talking about. That's what I'm talking about.
Yeah. What people don't understand is there's a necessity to repair. You know, it's okay saying, oh yeah, you know, racism is over now, we start from dot. But that's not how it works, does it? You've got to deal with the legacies of that. Like I said to you about inherited wealth, you know, this idea that black people are starting off 100 metres behind everybody else. We've got to catch up. before we can run the race. You know, so when people say, well, why are you calling it a black thing? Because there's a necessity for black people to start to organise and to get benefit from the fact that they've been discriminated against for so long. If you don't deal with the historic discrimination, then black people are never going to be able to compete within society. You know, all you have to do is look at statistics as regards socio-economic affluence in this society. Black people are always on the lowest rung of that ladder, and that's because of our unique history in this society and others. Do you know what I mean? And that is something that people don't want to acknowledge. They don't have a respect for history. That's what it is. It's that real lack of the understanding of the importance of history. You know, you just think we start from day one. You know, racism doesn't exist anymore. What are you talking about? You know, you're not discriminated against. Maybe your ancestors were, but it's different now. You know, without realising that there's so many connotations when you're based on the fact that black people were discriminated against, you know, legally in so many ways for so long.
Still are.
Still affects us today, doesn't it?
Maybe not legally, but still are in practice.
In practice, absolutely.
You know, so the practice hasn't stopped even if the laws have changed.
Yeah. So guys, it's been a really interesting half hour. Thank you very much for your contributions. Again, this is a subject that we could obviously discuss for many hours. Maybe we'll come back and look at the subject again. But for now, thank you, Alan. Thank you, Patrick. And thank you, Ray. And thank you, Laurence Westgaph. This is the Liverpool Black Men's podcast. And I hope to see you again soon.